Top of the Props is brought to you by Barkingham Palace Dog Grooming, 1/10 Hollylee Road, Lemire. Find them on Facebook. Barkingham Palace Dog Grooming Macarthur, where every pup's a king or queen. And GameView. GameView is a statistical application that allows you to track, analyse and improve your team's and players' performance by capturing team and individual player statistics. Find out more, gameview.com.au. And it's that time again. We've got a brand new episode of Top of the Props. And he was that bloody good last time around in episode 9. We had to get him back. It's Steve Jackson. Mate, thank you very much for coming back onto the podcast.
You're welcome, mate. How you going?
Oh, I'm good. Before we get into this, because I think we've done one other episode of this kind before, which was with Ben Cross, the former Melbourne Storm prop, where we got him on and we talked about his career. Then we got him on for something called 5 and 5, which we're going to do on this podcast with you, Steve, which will be in a minute. We'll go through your top 5 toughest opponents, and then we'll go through your top 5 favourite teammates as well. But before we get there, I did send you a text today, and I didn't get your comment on it when you rang me the Savo, but David Boyle, the great tough man from the Rabbitohs, in the previous episode, in episode 18, I said, who were your, just off the top of the head at the end of the podcast, I said, who were your 3 toughest opponents to play? And the first bloke that rolled off his tongue was one Steve Jackson.
How the hell did he get that one?
I asked him that, and I think he said Sam Bacco, and I can't remember who the other bloke was, but I actually said, Steve's a friend of the podcast. He's been on before. We're going to get him on again shortly, and he said, mate, he was just fast and very awkward to tackle, and all over the place. So that's a great compliment from one of the toughest players of the 80s, isn't it?
Oh, boy, thank you very much.
Yeah, that's nice.
That.
Yeah.
I, as a front rower, you try to mix it, and sometimes you're on your day, sometimes you weren't.
Well, it's a great compliment, mate. A really good compliment.
Awesome.
But let's jump in now. So we'll go through these one by one. We'll start with your top 5 toughest opponents, and something which I think you and I spoke about in our last chat, and something that I've brought up with other guys from your era too, is the fact that whether you were playing first grade, reserve grade, there was never an easy game, because there was either a young guy coming through, which was a schoolboy that was supposed to be the next big thing, or you were playing against the Australian pack or New South Wales or Queensland front rower or a Kiwi representative. There was never an easy game. So this would be a very interesting top 5 toughest opponents, Steve. Who's the first guy on your list?
Well, let me say this first of all. The game breeds tough men. Every opponent you come across, there's no pretenders out there at that level. They're tough in all different ways. And your first one, I'm going to go with Peter Johnston. Now,
yes.
I just googled Peter not long ago, and I thought he was older than me. He played like an experienced. Every time I come across him, he could knock you in the next week.
Yep.
Honestly, we played under the 5-yard rule. So he used to come out of the line, shoot out of the line that quick, and have you on your back, and you don't know what hit you. And I just realised Peter was younger than me. So, he was. A lot of people have said Peter Johnston is one of the hardest hitters you'll ever see in the game. And so he's my number 1.
Yeah, and funnily enough too, I wrote an article for the 81stminute.com, which is, I guess, the mother website of everything we do, and it was the hardest hitters in the game. And through the research I did, a lot of ex-players and fans on social media that grew up through that era, he kind of popped up out of nowhere, but then his name kept coming up, and it kept coming up. And if you look at him, he wore that big headgear, so he was kind of hidden under that headgear, and he was kind of more top-heavy than legs. But then you look, he's got a few highlights on YouTube as well.
Mate, he's like a human bullet.
Yeah. And he went to a whole bunch of different clubs too. He was at the Steelers, Parramatta. Was he one of those guys where? And I know there's no such thing as being scared when you play first grade.
He was at
South Sydney. Yep. But was he kind of one of those guys where you kind of keep your peripherals and go, all right, where's that headgear?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure, mate. Oh, yeah, there was times where, I always teach kids, like, and you know what? There's no problem about being scared, I tell you, because you know what bravery is when you're scared to do something, but you do it anyway.
Yep.
So, mate, there's a lot of times where you're questioning and second guessing yourself because there's a tougher man just around the corner. So the first one's Peter Johnson. Now, Les Davidson, Woodley.
Oh.
Mate, he's like a block of wood. he was as hard as a block of wood. There was no give in his body. Some big heavy blokes you run into, they cushion you. But Bundy, when you run into him, you're rattled. He was a bone rattler. So he was the kind of bloke that if he was one side of the ruck and you were on that side of the ruck, you do what we call a switch. You curl around the back of the ruck and go the other side.
And no, I wouldn't blame you either. But the funny thing is with David Boyle in the last episode. Is Les Davidson. I kind of said to him, he reminds me a bit of a, like a Dirty Harry, Clint Eastwood kind of bloke. What was he like off the field? And David said he was a very quiet man that very humble and, kind of, very respectful kind of thing. But on the field, I mean, some of those brawls he'd have in that pack with South and then later on with Cronulla, he was another guy where, was he a talkative guy on the field or was it just more, he's going to get on with his job? All action.
No words. No, he talked with his action there. And I didn't get to meet Bundy until later on in life. I played against him, but I got to meet him in a over 35s. We went to Papua New Guinea, and I got to meet him and have a drink with him. And mate, he's a gentleman. He's quiet, and but you could see in that face, you wouldn't stuff around with him.
They're the scariest bastards too, aren't they? The quiet ones that they could break they could break concrete in their hands, but mate, all they have to give they just have to give you a look.
Mate, you're right. The silent ones, they'd be very key. You don't hear them coming.
Did you get to play against him in Origin, or was he kind of in and out of the side?
No, I got to play against him in Origin. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you remember any confrontations? One-on-one with Les, or was it just kind of stay out of his way as well?
No, mate. I was too buggy just doing my own job, let alone having to try and put my hands up, mate. I was always with the attitude. I was tired enough just playing football. When you start swinging, I tell you, it's hard work.
And it's funny too. Sorry, I was just going to say too. Just quickly going back to these two blokes. From what I understand, the last I heard, Peter Johnson runs a Subway in Wollongong, and Les Davidson, I think he's a wharfie. He's a wharfie, and he's still working there too, I think.
That fits the bill.
Yeah, and I reckon he'll be there till the day he dies as well, Big Bundy.
The silent assassin.
I would not want to play against him.
Now, talking about intimidation, now this comes to my next player. My next player in line is Blocker Roach. Always trying to prove a point. Yep. Big blocker, because he was the ultimate intimidator. He would hang one on you. He would, he'd always do something to try and rile you, and he loved that kind of confrontation. He loved the stand up face to face kind of stuff. And if you didn't go to him, he'd go looking for you. So. Mate, tough man, and played a lot of games for Australia and New South Wales, and he was always a great man to come up against, and that was the kind of man where you tested yourself.
How difficult was it to defend against Blocker, because he wasn't completely upright, because he could also ball play too, so you were kind of in two minds whether he's going to flick a pass or throw one, because he could play before the line, but when he got going. And most of the time, this would be coming off his own line or over halfway. He was such a big bugger that when he held the ball, he had this, his arm was in front of the ball, and it was a bit like a bullback kind of thing. So how hard was it to tackle Steve Roach?
You're exactly right. He had a slight lean in his run, and he had the pointy bits all sticking at you. So good football. Back in our era, you had to cover your head with the loose arm not carrying the ball, and that's where an elbow sort of pops up. So if you went high on blokes like that, you'd cop their forearm or elbow. So Blocker, he had a great technique, and you had to hit him around the midriff, and he was strong, and he had a strong lower back. So good ball runners, they run with that slight angle and their lower back strength, they bump players off, and that's how you see Sonny Bill Williams in today's game. A little bit different style, but the same sort of the way you can just offload boards because you're going as hard as you can on them blokes, and they've got a bit of grunt, and they bump you off, and then they'll float.
Am I right too, though? Because we mentioned the first thing you mentioned, Steve, was how fiery he was, and he was like the bull. There was going to Leichhardt, it was his paddock, and everywhere else for that matter. But that also got him into a lot of trouble too. He missed a fair bit of football, including the '88 Grand Final. I'm pretty sure. Was that kind of just how he had to play? He had to really play right on the fringe to get the best out of himself.
Yeah, well, without knowing him that well off the field and personally, he had to be the apex predator. He had to be the number one man on that field, and he sort of that was the attitude he had, and that worked for him. He intimidated a lot of people.
Did you find just off topic for a minute, but did you find as a visiting player going to these different grounds, whether it be Balmain at Leichhardt, if you go down to Cogra and you've got a young Dragons pack, it doesn't matter where it is, but let's say
Newcastle was always a tough one back in my era.
The Chief and Mark Sargent and Butterfield and all these guys. Did you find that these guys found an extra arm and a leg at their home grounds, or was it just kind of they were professional enough that they could intimidate wherever they played?
It's so funny. I felt I played better in them kind of environments away from home. I took it on. I probably played worse in front of my home crowd. I like playing away. I always went well against Balmain. I remember Laurie Nichols. He used to sit there in the singlet in freezing cold weather, and after the '89, I was just, like I said, a bum from the bush, and got to play in the grand final and got to score a try. And then I went to West, and every time I played Balmain, I went to Gold Coast. I scored 2 tries against Balmain at Leichhardt, and Laurie come up to me in the bar after that game. I think it was about '92 or maybe '93. And he said, "What have you got against us?"
That's a real compliment, because that bloke had seen a lot of football.
Yeah, it was. It was awesome. He just come out of the blue, shook me hand. Lovely bloke. And we chatted for a while, and I just went, some footballers have grounds that they play well at, or teams they play well against. It's just sort of, but then there's others where you just play like crap.
Did you always feel like, and I'm just speculating here, but did you always feel like you were the underdog, going out there, even as the guy that won the grand final in '89, which we also spoke about the contract you got at the Maggies after that, and you were a Queensland representative player in your own right, but did you always feel like maybe that you played better at away games because there was less pressure on you, or why do you think that you played better?
I think that's it. I think when I left Canberra, I went to a West Side where in 1990 we ended up coming 12. So we were always the underdog. And then in '91, Warren Ryan come over, and we actually made the top 5. So we started winning a few games, and then I went to the Gold Coast, and we won the 3 wooden spoons, 3 years in a row. So yeah, I suppose that was the probably mentality, the thought process I had.
All right, we're up to number 4 now, Steve. We're flying by. So far in your toughest 5 opponents, you've named one of the most, I guess, a guy that's not spoken about all the time, Peter Johnston. Number 2, Les Davidson. Number 3, Blocker Roach. Who's your 4th most toughest opponent you've ever played?
Righto. Now, this bloke here, I've played with him, haven't played against him. So I've had to put him in as Kevin Carmody. Okay. Now, I went to England, and I played at Warrington there in England in 1987 off season. And Kevin, I remember when I watched him and Greg Dowling go for it when Australia played New Zealand. They both got sent to the bin, and then they into each other in that Lang Park there on the concrete part right near the grandstand. And he could fight, and he was another quiet guy. He was one of them like Bundy. You don't upset him, but you can just see the toughness in his eyes. And I just rate Kevin Carmody. It took me a lot over there in a short period of time, and talked about toughness of a front rower and intimidation of a front rower. That's their job. And I learned so much as a 22-year-old with Kevin.
And then correct me if I'm wrong, but back then these guys in the English comp, which wasn't called the Super League then, they played in their winter, which was our summer. So yeah. So there were a whole bunch of stars that were over there back in that time. So were there easy games like there are now in the Super League, or was it just again hard buggers? You're in the. I mean, you must have thought, okay, well I'm a front rower, but did you find that you were getting some cheap shots over there in England because you were one of the stars from Australia, one of the Aussies?
Yeah, well, I wasn't a star. I was just a reserve grader when I went there as a 22-year-old. But, mate, it was tough. Them Pommy boys, they were tough.
They loved the cheap shot, though, didn't they? More than us.
Yeah.
Surely, tell me, please.
You had to really cover up over there. Yeah, they'd hit you late. They'd hit you with everything. So I learned so much over there. And I'm going to that fifth bloke. I know that I'm just going to go to the fifth bloke straight away.
No, go for it.
This bloke, Les Boyd.
Yep.
Right. Yeah. Les Boyd was in England at the same time. Now, I used to watch Les Boyd on television. And when he played for West, played for Manly, and had them big tree trunk legs. And he wasn't the tallest man, Les. And we used to play cards over there at Warrington, very cold over in England in the winter months. And Les never drunk spirits or beer. He drank wine. And we're playing cards. This night, and I was in awe of Les Boyd because and he had the quietest voice, and watching him with his kids and his missus, and it wasn't the Les Boyd that I used to watch on TV.
Yep.
Anyway, Les started telling me, he had a couple of wines, had a couple of beers. He started telling my story. He said, "Listen here, Jacko, I consider you a mate of mine." He said, "But if we played against each other and your head was on the ground, I'd probably kick you in the head."
Yep.
And I went, "Righto, Boydie, I would chase you and I would get you back." And he said, "Well, that depends on how hard I kicked you in the head." And the way he said it, with his black eyes, his little piercing black eyes, and the way he said it, I just went, "Now that's the Les Boyd I watched on television."
Yeah. It's funny that
he was a maniac.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I've heard other stories where, who was it? It was a mate of mine, Albie Tallarico, who runs Steel Sports, who we call the New South Wales Cup through. And I got him on for an episode of another podcast I do called Hot Tub Rugby League Time Machine. And I think we got talking about Les Boyd and the Dragons player Brian Johnson, I think. And he was talking...
Brian Johnson.
Yeah.
They were at Warrington together, 87.
Yep. And I think Albie was talking about the fact that something happened to Brian, and then Les was... They were like the complete opposites. Les was into it, and he loved a good time, and Brian was completely different, but somehow they meshed and became these best mates. And it was strange because Les gets this horrible rap, and some of it, or a lot of it, I guess, comes from what happened in State of Origin with Daryl Broman. But on his own, Les Boyd, I mean, he's a great of the game and a legend, I guess, of the Magpies Club. And he went to Manly too. But it's funny that you say that there was this Les Boyd on the field, and then there was Les Boyd off the field.
Yep. Yeah, and that's what I got to see both. I got to feel I knew him as I watched him on TV. And then when I went to England, I saw him with his family, and then I got to play with him. And then I see three different things of Les Boyd. And Les Boyd admits he can't fight. But, mate, you'd have to knock him out to stop him. You would have to hit him with a block of wood. You wouldn't beat him because you would get stuffed. You'd break your hands on his head. He would just keep coming at you. He was just a tough man. And when blokes, when players give it out, they've got to be able to cop it because don't worry, they get it coming back at them. And mate, no one could get the better of Les Boyd.
All right, if you had to do a quick profile of Les Boyd, how much of it is crazy football man and how much of it is good bloke off the field? What do you reckon the percentage is?
Oh, mate.
Or how much is it intertwined in the middle?
Look, mate, good man. You know, he would stand. I love a tough footballer. You know what? And that's just the time you spend on the training paddock and on the football field. You're tough, but you bring a player away. They're usually I'll tell you a story.
Yeah.
I'm up in Mackay. I'm watching TV, right? And I'm watching on a Saturday afternoon. We get the Sydney football on a Saturday afternoon. We get the Brisbane football on the big league on the Sunday afternoon at 6:00. So I'm a 15-year-old kid watching New South Wales Rugby League. And I was a bit of St. George supporter back then, and I went, oh, geez, that bloke here, he'd be a real arsehole, or that bloke there, he'd be a nice bloke, and then I had my opinions on players. When I actually got down to meet them, it was never the opposite.
Never meet your heroes. That's what they say. Never meet your heroes.
Yeah, because you're a different character. When you've got adrenaline pumping through your body, you do things that you wouldn't normally do. So usually I found them tough maniacs on a football field were the nicest guys away from the game.
Yeah, and absolutely. And if you look at these blokes too, I mean, I've you see Blocker Roach on telly, and you hear these stories about Les Boyd. You talk about how quiet and humble Les Davidson is. The same with Kevin Tamati, and Peter Johnston. Bloody runs a Subway in Wollongong, but they're still in your top 5.
That's how it works.
Yeah,
that's how it works.
Well, that's a great top 5, Steve. And just for reference, I'll quickly go through them again. Steve Jackson's top 5 toughest opponents. Number 1, Peter Johnston. Number 2, Les Davidson. Number 3, Steve Blocker Roach. Number 4, Kevin Tamati. And number 5, Les Boyd. All right, let's get on to this one now, Steve. Let's talk about your top 5 favourite teammates. This should be fun. And look, mate, go nuts. Say whatever you want. It helps the podcast, but obviously do it within the realms of what you think's appropriate, mate. But and do it in whatever order you want. But let's start at the top. Who's your favourite teammate that you ever played with?
Look, it's a real tough question because you have different stages of your life. You know, like when I first went down to Canberra, I was a 20-year-old kid.
Yeah.
So we were radical. I mixed with boys from Wagga, you know, like Robbie Dunn, Paul Dunn. They were from Wagga boys, and we all played under 23s. Our front row and under 23s when we first started in Canberra was Glenn Mazris, Steve Walters-Hooker, and I played the other front row. And then I went on to West and come into a couple of other different places. Went to the Gold Coast as an older person. I got married on the Gold Coast. And Peter Gill till to this day is one of my best mates. Peter Gill is my best mate.
I've still got one of my footy cards in my treasure chest of footy memorabilia is a brand new 1993 Peter Gill Seagulls card. I don't know why. As a kid, I just thought that Tash, Magnum PI.
He looks like Rod Reddy. Yeah. Rod Reddy. He played for St. George too. They both played for St. George. But Gilly's Mr. Durable. Gilly, we played at the Gold Coast there, and we were playing Illawarra. And that was just when the 6-man interchange come in 1992.
Yep.
Brent Todd gets sent off in the first 30 seconds by Eddie Ward. We played with 12 players. We made 7 interchanges in that match. About 10 minutes to go, I come off with I've done my ankle and I've gone into the sheds. They've needled me, and Peter Gill come in just after I come in, and he's done something. They carried him off the stretcher, done something to his leg, and he's watching me get these needles. And I've got up and I've jumped on my foot. I said, right, let's put the boot back on. I'm right. So I went back out. Peter Gill, as I was going back, Peter Gill said, give me what you just give him to get him back on the paddock. But Gilly had a spiral break of the ankle.
Oh, fuck.
The next day they x-rayed and he had a spiral break of the ankle. But what he said in that dressing said, as I was getting out, give me what he just had because I want to get back out there. So Peter Gill was a very tough man. Mr. Durable, he called him. Peter, he was just amazing football player. He's an amazing man, Peter. So like I said, we're still friends today. And in that match, I tell you what happened in that match. I come back on, and Wally was captain coach. Wally Lawson was captain coach back then. So I think Strongy might have been doing the replacements on the side, and they lost count, or something happened. And I went back out in the field. I didn't need to go back out in the field. We ended up beating Illawarra that night. With 12 players we had, we beat them that night at Seagull Stadium. And one of the reporters picked up through the week that we made 7 interchanges, and they took the points off us.
Oh,
that was bad.
And was that a local? Was that a local journo?
Oh, I can't remember. I can't remember.
Had to be. It would have been a Sydney guy for sure. It wouldn't have been one of the Gold Coast journos. Surely not.
Well, you'd reckon probably rugby league week was probably what's his name? What's
Oh,
Turk?
who was back? Who was at Rugby League Week then? Jesus. There was a
What's
few of
his
them there.
name? Look at that. Look, you know what? Played front row. No HIA back in my day, so I'm lucky I can remember yesterday.
So is Peter Gill on your list? Is he one?
Peter Gill. I've got Peter Gill right at the bottom of my list here, but he's at the top of my list.
Oh,
Peter Gill I met later on in life. And as you get older, you get more appreciation to mate. You know, mates, as a young bloke, you're just partying, you know, you're different kind of mates. But as you get older, you create lifelong friends. And I know a lot of football players are still lifelong friends, but Peter's the top of my list. Look, Stevie Walters.
Yep.
I love boxing. I got the opportunity to play with boxing. I was like I said, in the under-23s, he went straight up to reserve grade, then went to first grade in 1986. And then I just, I went from under-23s, then into reserve grade, and got to, you know, I used to play golf with Craig Bellamy. I couldn't play golf. They used to take my money off me all the time. I was an easy target. They said, "Right, Jacko, we'll give you 2 strokes a hole." And I'm thinking, 2 strokes a hole? That sounds pretty good. But yeah, they'd be getting pars, and I'd be getting 10s. And I don't know how many times I threw my club. So I lived near a golf course, and I used to go out and hit a couple hundred balls 3 or 4 times a week. And then after about 3 years, I ended up being pretty good at the game. But they used to take Stevie Walters, Craig Bellamy, Ashley Gilbert, Phil Carey. Remember Phil Carey, the old manly winger that come to Canberra?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Boxy, we still, Boxy, I think he's working with a super mob out there at the mines, and he comes into Mackay quite often, and we get together and we go and have dinner and have a chat. So Stevie Walters,
Is he as cheeky as his smile and his laugh suggests? Because Kevin and Kerrod, they got their heads screwed. I know that Kerrod can be a bit silly too, but Stevie Walters, when I see him laugh, you know, that little cheeky smile, was he a bit of a devil away from the field as well, or?
He is so clever. The Walters boys are so clever because they are comedians. You cannot leave the gate open; they run straight through it. Yeah. You know, if they're like in the Queensland side, or Alfie Langer and Kevin Walters, if they're having a go at you take it. Yeah. Don't try and respond because you can't beat them. And they're so witty. They're so witty.
were they the kind of guys in Queensland camp where you'd, you know, find something that shouldn't be in your football bag and stuff like that, or were they just kind of give it to you in front of the team kind of guys?
Oh yeah, they just give it to you. You just remain quiet. If you had nothing to give, if you weren't quick-witted, you just shut up. And Marty Ballard, they used to get Marty Ballard all the time. Marty used to go back, and I'm thinking, oh, stop it, Munster. They're too good for you. You cannot win against these pair, especially that Alfie and Buddy Kevy. But yeah, mate, they're the kind of players that create that gelling effect. You know what?
Yeah.
A football team, we're all the same. We just wear different coloured jerseys, right? Yeah. So a football team has your fast blokes, your witty blokes, your chunky blokes, your strong blokes. They all have the same mix, and they're the gelling effect. Then boys, you need that in a football club. Is that 1 or 2 blokes that pulls that whole side in together? The Walters boys are very good at that.
I think Martin Bell is he a councilman up north somewhere, or a mayor or something?
He's in Mackay with me. Yeah, he's in Srina. He's in Srina. He's a councillor. And you know what? I was just having a coffee last week in the main street, and look who walks past. Big Munster.
Yeah.
Hey, Munster, you go. He just looks at me, shakes his head and says, Jacko.
Well, no wonder why. I sent him an email on his official work email about Top of the Props, and I never got anything back. So, you let him know next time you see him, mate, on the street. Just give him a little short one for me.
Oh, well, so Curtis is not going to vote for you, mate. You're out next term.
Who's number 3 on your list, Steve?
Righto. So I have got Peter Gill. I've got Stevie Walters. Righto. Now, Laurie. Laurie's, isn't it great to have a mate like Laurie Daly? Laurie and I lived together in '89 at Canberra, and I was a reserve grader. Laurie was just an unbelievable football player. He could play in any position. All the girls loved Laurie, whether they were 15 or 50. They just all loved Laurie, and we used to get phone. I used to have to screen all the calls.
Yeah.
Because he'd never answer the door and he'd never pick up the phone because
I heard that
back in
about
them
Laurie
days-
from someone, that he was quite the ladies' man back in his day, without giving up too much. But he was quite the famous fella, wasn't he?
Oh, look, mate, I could tell you some stories that make your hair curl. But anyway, no, not God, no. Laurie's a gentleman. Laurie's a dead set gentleman.
He is.
And he loved the game with a passion and still loves the game, and as we all know. And he was just an unbelievable roomie to have for a reserve grade player to be living with Laurie and open my eyes on how good this game is on and off the field.
He was a country boy too, wasn't he?
Yes, I went and spent Christmas of 80? It might have been 88. 1988, Christmas at Junee. I went to stay at his place at the Commercial Hotel.
Yep.
And he's got 7 sisters.
Oh, wow.
Wow, 7 sisters. He's the only boy.
Yeah, well.
Yeah, so...
you went and spent Christmas Day 88 with the Dailies in Junee?
Yeah, I spent Christmas with the Dailies.
Beautiful.
I'm pretty sure it was 1988, because 87 I went to England. 86 was way too early, so it would have been 1988. Spent Christmas at Junee, and what a time they showed me. Our country people in New South Wales celebrated, and they used to be able to drink. We used to drink what they call Ray Bevans. The Sevens, the Ray Bevans, the Joel Garners, and that's nicknames for all the different size beers.
Isn't it funny though? Like, I guess a lot of the Queensland versus New South Wales crap comes from, the people of Sydney who probably never ever left Sydney. But when you actually go out to country towns around New South Wales, they're a lot more like Queenslanders than they are from people from Sydney. But the difference is that they still love their New South Wales team, and they still hate Queensland. But the country people in New South Wales. I mean, if a lot of people in Sydney that have never passed, I guess, Campbelltown where I am, and anywhere from Wollongong south or west, they wouldn't understand what it is to support a footy team or support a son coming through the ranks, and for yourself as well from country Queensland as well. It's a completely different world, isn't it? Football wise, life wise, everything.
Yeah, you know what? I couldn't really understand it as a player. I couldn't understand the tragic, the supporter tragic. When I went to West, they were just crazy, hanging over as we were running out the tunnel, and some of the things they used to say to the other team, I used to think, wow, yeah, that's a bit hurtful, but that was their life. That was every part of their life was their support of that football team, and I really couldn't understand it. And then even when I retired, people said, who do you go for? And I used to say, Queensland. I go for Queensland, because I played in more clubs than Slim Dusty. If I went for my club, I'd be going for too many. So and it's not until probably in the last 10 years, I'd say, that I've become a Raiders tragic. And Ricky Stewart has been the biggest influence in that area by teaching his players that the history of the game is what you need to become a great player.
Yep.
If you don't understand the history of the jersey, how can you fulfill that jersey to the best of your ability? So, and as we all know, how well Mel did with Queensland and all them on that big run, because they created that. Mel didn't give me a phone call back in 2011. I'm outside my chicken shop, and Mel's on my phone, and he never rings me, and I was ordering a coffee, and I looked down, it was Mel Meninga on the phone. I said to the lady, I said, I've got to take this call, I'm sorry.
It's Mel Meninga.
I said, Mel, how are you? And he went, good, thanks, Jack. I said, what could I do for a man like you? And he said, Jacko, can you talk to me boys? Yeah. And I just went, but I'm thinking, well, he did a lot of Indigenous work up this way.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, oh, no, you're not talking about the Queensland Origin side, are you? He said, yeah, I am. Went, what could I say to a group of men like that? Darren Lockyer is last year. Cameron Smith just coming into the fray. Big Nate Miles, Jonathan Thurston, mate, all these legends.
Steve Price, Petro,
And he said, Jacko, this is exactly what I want you to come and talk 15 minutes about your life, just in front of these boys. And I said, I don't know if I could do that.
Yeah.
And you know what? I did it, and it was a Saturday night. They brought me into camp with Pat Rafter, and we got to stand in front of this group of men and talked about our life for 15 minutes, and how humbling was that? It was just the most amazing night I've ever had. So that's what Mel and now Ricky's doing that with the Raiders, and they make an old football player feel great, and at the same time are helping a young football player understand to be a great football player. Isn't it good?
And look, it's amazing. And I think I'm just guessing here, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but when a Queensland State of Origin side is looking for an edge, and they bring in a player, whether it's Steve Jackson or Carl Webb or John Buttigieg or whoever it is, or Paul Bowman, Josh Hannay, it doesn't matter who it is. What you talk about is like, maybe you talk about what it is to be a football player and wear the jersey, but I guess a lot of it too is how you got there and what it means to represent your family and your region in Queensland as well, surely. And I think that's what Ricky Stewart's done as well with the club at Canberra.
Yeah, he's on my list there because he rings me, I ring him. We've got a young player that's leaving Mackay next year. His name is Toby Thorburn. You have a look at this kid play, 18-year-old. I've had him play in first grade this year.
Yep.
And mate, this kid, bar an injury, he will hit the heights of NRL. And he's going, and so with Peter Mulholland, he's now at Canberra with their recruiting. He's been there for quite a while.
Peter Mulholland, yep.
Yeah, Skull. So Skull got me over to West way back in 1990 from Canberra.
Yep.
So we go back a long way, Skull and I. And this is so beautiful. This game, honestly, it just keeps giving. I know why I love it so much. It just keeps giving. This game owes us nothing. As a football player, the game owes us nothing. We owe it everything because it just keeps giving. And as an older man and getting invited into these camps or with players like Ricky does with us, Todd Greenberg let me stand on the football field in last year's grand final with the Roosters when they played the Raiders, and I got to stay up in the big Olympian room up there, and it was an amazing night. And
it was. I was there, mate. Were you down on the field for the Viking Club?
Yeah, I was right.
Mate, listen, I don't want to. I've already dropped an F-bomb, but it's a podcast. It's fine. How fucking good was that Viking Club at the game? Jesus, that was the best.
My hair was standing on its end.
Me too. I'm not a Canberra fan, and I had goosebumps everywhere.
Mate, I'm a 53-year-old man standing, and I'd forgotten how much energy and electricity there was in front of 83,000 people. I'm standing right beside Ruben Wiki.
Yep.
Ruben Wiki's 40 years old, and he's fit as, he's muscly as, and I'm going, Ruben, do you feel like playing? He said, oh, Jacko, I feel like running out now. I said, yeah, mate, I feel like it too, but I do a Hemi on the way out to the field.
Oh, mate.
What an amazing night that was.
It was brilliant, and I was on the other side too. I was down in one of the I don't know if you call it a mezzanine or whatever it is, but mate, it was just brilliant to see all those old Raiders players that they use all out in the field in front of the clap.
Yep.
And look, the Roosters were down the other end, but I reckon all the neutrals, including myself, excuse me, and my fiance, we were up and we were doing the Viking clap. I was teaching her the clap during the week and showing her on YouTube how to do it and all this stuff. And mate, it's just
how quiet did it go after the clap?
I know.
For that many people.
Yeah, and the funny thing too was the Roosters fans during the week was saying, let's get the Roosters, the East chant going during the clap. And I'd say, good luck. And you couldn't even hear it.
What an amazing concept that Viking clap is.
Oh, like whoever came up with it is a genius.
Yeah,
it's either,
that's a genius.
It's one of the. It's got to be a Ferner. Surely it's a Ferner. But so hang on, I'm getting lost here. So we got to Laurie Daly, and then we started talking about Mal, and then we started talking about Ricky.
So Ricky. So we've got to put Ricky in there.
Ricky's in there. Yep.
So I'll put Ricky and Mal in there together because they've done the same
Mal.
thing. They booked, and right, fifth one.
Yeah, go for it.
Or the sixth one because I put Mel in there with Ricky. So Craig Bellamy.
Yeah, right. Yep.
Craig Bellamy did the same thing. I just had that chat in 2011 in front of the Queensland side, and I was so humbled by it. And then Craig Bellamy rings me the next year. Melbourne Storm are playing Canterbury Bankstown up here with Benny Barber went that length of the field and give it to Morris. Scored. Remember that game in Mackay?
Yep.
And Melbourne got beaten that game.
Yep.
This is we have a laugh at, is me and Craig Bellyache. Bellyache, I have this picture. I think I sent it to you. Remember the picture I sent to you?
Yeah, you did. Yeah, you sent it to me.
If Craig Bellamy doesn't turn into one of the greatest coaches, this picture of the 1989, we'll have the Winfield Cup on our shoulders, walking around the Oval. It would have been just two bums carrying the Winfield Cup trophy, remember?
Amazing. You did. Yeah.
So Bellyache, he rings me. He said, Jacko, we're in Mackay. He says, is there a chance that you can come and just meet the boys and just say hello and just, you come from humble beginnings and got to do things that players only dream of. And I went, oh, man, I'd only just talked to the Queen, so I said, oh, yeah, I can do that. And I got to stand in front of, Billy Slater, Cameron Smith, all that great Melbourne Storm side. And, mate, that was 2000, what year was that one?
2011.
Anyway,
or 12.
It was
12.
When did they lose their points? They didn't lose the points in 12, did they?
No. Well, they lost. Oh, sorry. I was thinking about Ben Barber then. So they lost their points in 10. They came back in 11 and got to the prelim final, and then 12
and
they won it.
12.
Yeah.
And won it in 12. And you know what happened in 2012? How's this? I went and had a talk with them on that night. They lost to the Bulldogs. They lost the next 5 games.
Oh shit!
And I joked to Craig Bellamy and I said, "Hey Craig, do you realise when I come and talk to your boys, I send them to sleep for 5 weeks?"
Well, it worked.
He said, now I look at that. He said, that's the last time you'll be talking to him again. I said, but hang on, mate. You come and won the grand final, so you needed that.
That's it. No, well, mate, I mean, it must feel good, though, being a former player and doing what you've done, that all these other people, and some of the greatest names we'll ever hear, Meninga, Bellamy, Stewart, all these guys still refer to you and call you and say, we want some input from you. That must mean something to you.
That is the coolest thing about my life. I talk to Wayne Bennett. I text Wayne Bennett. And you know how many texts Wayne Bennett must get? He texts me straight back. I don't do it all the time. I just, out of the blue, I might say, hi, how you going, Wayne? Or, when he was going through some tough times there. And Wayne talks... Wayne Bennett, I got to meet him up here again. He was coaching Illawarra. No, not Illawarra.
St. George Illawarra. Oh, okay. Newcastle.
No, it was Newcastle. And I wanted to take all my kids. I've got 4 children, 3 boys and a girl. And I can't. Courtney would have been around about 16. She's my eldest, so I would have had 16, 14, 11, and 9. And I took all my kids. I said, kids, I'm taking you to a man that's been my biggest role model in life. And so I took him over, and I got to meet. And Wayne, you know what Wayne said to me as a player?
Was this at the pub, or was this at a restaurant in Canberra when you were sitting there as a reserve grade player? And he looked at you.
I don't know.
He looked at you. He looked at you and said, "Mate, what are you doing here?" or something like that. Was that the same one? When I said that I'm thinking about getting a player manager, he said, "Why, you can't play?" I looked at him. I was 22, 1987. That was. I looked at him and went, oh, well, I better learn how to play then. And then there was another time I ran over a cone and didn't go around the corner. And he was straight in line with me as I straightened up, and he said, you get your big fat ass around that cone, you'll never play first grade. So anyway, Wayne used to talk like that to me. I used to think he hated me, but Peter Jackson, I lived with Peter Jackson, and Peter used to say, I said, Peter, why does he hate me so much? He said, what do you think when he says that to you? I said, I'll show the skinny bugger. He said, see, that's why he says it to you. He gets you lifted up. So anyway, Wayne used to talk to me like that as a coach to a player. Anyway, I took my 4 children over to the BB Prince Stadium here in Mackay. And I said, Wayne, these are my children. This is Courtney, this is Leighton, Kai, and Nate. And he met them all, shook their hands. And I said, Wayne, I probably wasn't as successful as I wanted to be as a football player. And he looked at me, he looked at my kids, and he says, Jacko, you are a success. Have a look at your beautiful children. You got your business here in Mackay, and he made me tingle, So Wayne is just, he'll knock you down to get you up as a player. But then as a man that's older, he shows you appreciation of you as a man. He's an unbelievable man, Wayne Bennett. I think we spoke about this too last time. Is that how many players he's touched in his coaching career, and how many and how many still call him post career for advice too. It's an incredible thing. All right, Steve. We've also got some fan questions, which is also. We don't do it all the time, but we do it in situations like this where we do it like a 5 and 5, which we've done for this episode. And you can also, if you're listening for the first time, you can follow us on Twitter at the 81st Minute, through Facebook, the 81st Minute Rugby League, and also through the 81st Minute at outlook.com. So the first question tonight comes from John on email, and he says, how do you think you'd go in the modern game, and do you think young players make too much money too quickly?
Well, right,
that's a loaded question.
Let's talk about the too much money too quickly.
Yep.
No one gives you money. No one just gives you money. So you get money for a reason. And you know what? I've had 2 hip replacements, shoulder operations. I've had 2 back operations. And you do not ever get paid enough money to what your body. I'm 55 next month. And I think if people want to give you the money, you're just going to think, I'm not going to give it back. So, No, I don't think so. I believe it's a business now, and you get as much money as you can, but that's not why you play it. You play this game not to let your mate that stands beside you down. And the other part of the question, I would love to play this game.
Yeah, I think it'll really suit you, Steve. Like, even more than when you played.
I was pretty quick for a big fella.
Yes.
And I could get over 40 quite quick. And because of the 10-yard drill and the speed of the ruck, I would love getting in behind that ruck now. I would love playing it. It's opened up a bit more, and you've got to be a lot fitter. But if the rules dictate on what you need to do, and if I needed to give up drinking, I would have given up drinking for this game.
And that's the other thing too, Steve, is that you had another job too when you played, right, most of the time. So if you were a professional full-time football player and that's the only thing you did, you'd be 50 times fitter than what you were back then. And from what I recall too, didn't you play some centre as well back in your day?
Oh, good memory. I debuted. My first grade debut run on against Balmain halfway through 89.
At Leichhardt? Was it Leichhardt or Seaford?
No, it was at Seaford. We got beaten by Balmain at Seaford, and I tore medial ligaments in my knee in the first 10 minutes.
Lovely. All right, I'm glad I brought that up. Next
question. Let's get rid of that. Next question.
Next one. This one comes from Craig. This one's via email as well. Do you ever think... hang on, I'm going straight off the email here. Do you ever think which way... I don't know if this makes sense. Do you ever think which way your career would have went without that try in 89? Before you answer that, weren't you already signed by the Maggies for the next season, though?
We were already in heavy discussions through the finals because I was playing reserve grade. We got knocked out a week before the grand final, so I had discussions with West each week of the finals.
Yep.
So yeah, I hadn't made my mind up that I was going. After the 89 grand final, Canberra said, we want you to stay here. We're going to look after you. But it wasn't to be. And then I left. What the thing I left Canberra to West was for a number jersey. I had number 23 jersey at Canberra in reserve grade, and I went to a number 8 jersey at West. So I had to make the move.
So it was always going to happen. Whether that try happened or not, you were always going to Campbelltown.
Always going to Campbelltown. I may have got a couple more dollars with that try.
Beautiful. Well, that helps. All right, this one comes from Matt. Who was the most unlucky player you ever played with? And I assume he means by injuries, stuff like that. Someone that was like a real gun coming through, never really got there because of different things that went against them.
Oh, look, I can't pinpoint one because I've seen so many devastated players. I remember went to a party one night. This young halfback was playing reserve grade at West. He jumped off a roof and cracked his leg on the side of a pool, and that was the end of his career at 20 years old. I've seen blokes just waste their talent by not having the complete package. To be good at anything, you've not just got to have the ability, you've got to have the commitment, the want, the sacrifice, all these words that we learn. And I've seen so many players have that ability, They had more ability in their little finger than what I had, but they didn't have that complete package. They wanted to party too much.
Girls, drugs, whatever.
Totally right. You know, I've just seen so many, and it is a bit of a shame when you see that. But you know what? It's always going to happen.
I think they call it a coulda, shoulda, woulda, which we all know. We all know plenty of them around the traps. Wherever you are in Australia, where everyone's got this bloke that they talk about. Go, this guy would have done this and done that, but unfortunately, it just doesn't work out.
I hear people say, "Oh, he would have been the greatest. He would have done," but he wasn't.
Yeah.
What do you mean he would have been the greatest? And people talk about potential. I hate that word potential because they said, "Well, he's had so much potential," but potential is what you got right now. You know what? What's going to happen 12 months? 12 months time. The potential is right now. What can you do right now?
Yep. And another saying is you can't buy groceries on potential forever. So you got to kick on. Here's another one. He hasn't given a name. He's just called himself Goldie Fan. He says, "Why do you think footy teams on the Gold Coast have always struggled?" Mostly struggled.
Because they haven't had the management right. You know what? You can't blame a football side. You know, they talk about you can't blame a coach. You know, you got to blame the top of the tree.
Yeah.
You know, if things aren't working right in the football ranks, well, definitely it's not right at the top of the tree with management. So if management, and I know when I was at the Gold Coast, we got 3 wooden spoons, and there was so much in-house bickering and fighting at the top level. They were ripping each other apart, and we played like that as a football team. We were ripping each other apart. So you've got to have a solid base in management, and they've got to do their job. They've got to run the business. Then they put a coaching staff in place, and they've got to do their job. They worry about the football, and then the players just got to be told what to do. And when you've got that process all right, like you have a look at any Wayne Bennett. You know, Wayne Bennett. You can imagine the president or the chief executive saying to Wayne Bennett, "How come you haven't got that bloke in at 5'8"? You know what Wayne Bennett say?
Tell him to get fucked.
Same as Craig Bellamy. You know, everyone knows their place. In a good management group, everyone knows their place and doesn't step over the boundary. That's the trick. We've all been in business for a long time now. And it's the same thing. It's the same principle in business as what it is in a sporting team.
I've got 2 more for you. It was going to be one, but I've added one really quickly at the end from myself. But the final one from our listeners, and he says his name's Mick from Hinchinbrook, which is out Campbelltown way. It's in Liverpool. This is a pretty easy one. You can give us a one-word answer for this. Where did you live when you moved to the Magpies?
Well, it's not really one thing because I lived at Bradbury for a short time.
Bradbury, beautiful. That's all my local pub is, the Bradbury Hotel.
Bradbury Hotel.
That's my pub.
Me, Lido, and Edgar Britt. Darren, Britt, me, and Lido.
That's my
pub. On them card machines, double up.
I'm there every second day, mate.
So I lived in Bradbury, and then I moved to Roos.
Yeah,
I went
Roos.
back there at Roos.
Yeah.
And John Hickey owned the Roos Hotel out there, and I used to work as the garbo. I used to be the auto man.
Did you?
Yeah, I used to run behind the truck. You know how we had to hang off the back?
Yeah.
But I'd run. I was the fittest I've ever been when I first went to Western 1990. I used to do 12K on my 3-hour shift, and then I'd go have a beer at 8:30 in the morning at the Roos Hotel.
Do you remember the big road through Roos, Junction Road, which went for about 4Ks and it had about 3 hills in it?
Yep, I do.
Yeah. Funny that because one of my local clubs is the Roos Warriors, and I've played there in 3 different stints over about 12 years, and my stepdad grew up there, and I spent a lot of time in Roos as well, mate. So that's really funny.
Look at that, mate. We've probably run the same path over different times. How's that?
That's it. And, I got to the Warriors as a kid in the early 90s, about under 6s, something like that. So you're right, mate. Yeah. We probably crossed paths. Probably not at the pub, but somewhere else anyway. Here's the last one, and I've just scribbled this down, mate, because I know you got to get going. The Seagulls Lease Club was basically on top of the old ground there. What was it like playing at a place like Seagulls where you probably weren't expected to win all the time, but was there half an eye on the Lease Club when you're down by 30? What was it like playing right next to a Lease Club like that? And you've got all these visiting teams in, and they're probably going to go mad after the game, and they're not getting a flight back till the next day. Can you tell us some stories about Seagulls Lease Club back in the day?
Yeah, look, mate, I didn't really think about the party, and like we used to have a great time, but that was up in Surfers Paradise. We didn't used to do that at Seagulls. So,
Oh, okay.
mate,
Yep.
our job was to get that job done on that. That was a great ground. Great ground. I didn't finish the best way. I had to retire with the broken back, and it was a bit of a sad moment for me when I had to retire there at Seagulls. So I remember that ground in the darkness, sitting there in the darkness on my own, just going.
Well, I've screwed this interview up, haven't I?
Oh, that was the end of my career then, and mate, that's another story. I'll have to tell you one time, because it made me understand that how fragile life can be. And 1 minute, you're playing for Queensland, you're just loving football, loving life, and then within 12 months, I went from the penthouse to the outhouse, and then it made me, now as a 54-year-old man looking back, going how fragile life can be. And mate, when things are going well, appreciate it, love it, because when things are going tough, that's when rugby league teaches you the resilience, and that's when you got to really knuckle down and then fight your way through.
Well, I feel like a complete dickhead for finishing with that question, but you've saved it with your words, mate, and how well you speak and talk about your career and how much you love the game. And look, it was very easy to ask you to come back onto the podcast, because you're not just a great yarn, but you truly love the game, mate, and I really appreciate you being back on top of the props.
Mate, you're a champion. It's great to have a chat with you. Thanks, mate.